guys. I'm going to do a quick video here about winterizing a boat motor. I actually wasn't going to do this at first, but then I realized, the motor's still out of the boat here. I was thinking, well, what percentage of people are realistically going to be winterizing a motor out of a boat? Regardless, you still have to do it, but I thought it'd be kind of funny to show that. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized it might actually make sense, because this will give me the opportunity to show you all the things kind of up close that if I was trying to film this in the boat, it's kind of hard to get down and kind of show you where the drain plugs and all that kind of stuff is. So this is going to be my take on the proper way to winterize a boat motor. I know there's a lot of schools of thought on what the correct way to do it is, but I'll show you what my thoughts are. We'll go from there. So I apologize, I'm shooting this at night, but kind of got my light umbrellas, soft boxes, whatever you call them, set up out here so we can do this at night. As usual, doing this at the last minute. It's supposed to get pretty cold tonight. I don't think we're going to get a freeze tonight, but tomorrow night there's a pretty good chance of it, so I figured I'd get it done tonight and put her to bed for the winter. So let me turn around here and show you. Alright, so hopefully you can see what's going on here. I got these lights on, so it should be pretty well lit up. I actually have this thing out under my hoist still with the chain, so because this support I have underneath, it works fine for holding the motor up off the ground, but I don't trust it with it starting and running and kind of shaking around a little bit, so I just take a little bit of the weight off with the hoist. I did get my carburetor kind of tuned up here off camera, since I hadn't actually started it up since I rebuilt the carb in one of the previous videos. Got everything plumbed back in and hooked up, and I did get my idle screw adjusted to where it sounds good, but there's more stuff I'm going to have to do once it's on the boat, like setting the correct idle and all that kind of stuff, but got all that plumbed up. So just to kind of recap, in your case, if it's in the boat, you don't have to do any of this stuff, but if you go back and check my video on how to run a Mercruiser on a stand, kind of got the same thing going here. Got the gas tank plumbed in to the fuel filter inlet, got the battery hooked up, negative to the block, positive to the starter post, and I got my my little homemade harness here, just like in that video. Got the fuel primed and sent up, and I've had this running now for a minute, and I got my garden hose going in with the exhaust pipe on, so I got the water flowing. So the first thing you want to do to winterize the motor, now I'm going to leave out the outdrive stuff because that's over there still, and I don't really have a good way to show you that. So this is just going to pertain to the motor. There's other things you should do to the boat before winter that I'll cover in a separate video later. You want to have your motor ready to go. We're going to start it up, get it up to operating temperature. So you want to just let it sit and idle. Do not rev it. A lot of people get their motors going on the with the earmuffs on the outdrive, and they sit there and rev it thinking, oh, I'll get it up to temperature faster if I idle it higher. Never rev your motor on muffs, because your garden hose through the earmuffs and through those little pickup holes is not supplying enough water for the impeller and the drive. That's a great way to fry your impeller. So in my case, I'm actually okay because I'm bypassing the impeller, just going right in, so I'm okay, but I'm still not really going to rev it. I'm just going to let it sit and idle, get up to temp, and then once that happens, you want to take, let me grab it here. There's all kinds of different brands. Can't recommend any because I don't know if any work better than the others. What I got from my local store is a CRC fogging oil. So what you want to do is get the motor up to operating temperature. And one way to tell that is if your motor's out of a boat like mine is wait till your choke is fully open. That'll give you a pretty good indication that it's up to temp, and maybe once it's fully open, let it run for a few more minutes just to be sure. And then what you want to do is take the idle, or the throttle mechanism over here. Sorry, I keep walking back and forth. You would normally have a throttle linkage on here, but on my Mercarb, this is the throttle linkage. So if you look down in there, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but that's actually the butterflies. So once this thing's running, you want to idle this up just a little bit. You don't, like I said, don't rev it high, but if you have somebody that can help you, keep an eye on the RPMs, maybe rev it up to like 2,000. And as you're doing, you can see the fog coming out there. As you're doing that, you want to take your fogging oil, and they usually come with a little hose like this. I like to use, you don't have to, but spray it down into, if you have a Mercarb, into both throttle plates. And when you do that, you're going to notice the engine kind of tends to bog down a little bit. That's normal. Some fogging oils I've used before actually really starve the engine out, and some say to actually spray it until the engine dies. But I've noticed for this stuff, it doesn't really kill the engine. It can just bog down a little bit, and you'll see a lot of smoke coming out the exhaust. That's once again normal. So really what the purpose of this stuff is when you spray it in there, the intake sucks it into all the cylinders, and it just gives a nice protective coating on the cylinder walls to prevent any corrosion. And the main reason you want to make sure you're up to temp when you do this is because if you do it when the engine's cold, you'll actually get a lot of condensation that'll build up on the inside of the motor, and that will cause rust and all kinds of damage. So can't stress enough, you want to get it up to operating temperature when you do this. And I'll show me doing this. I just wanted to explain it ahead of time so you can tell what I'm doing. So let me do that, because that's really the only thing you need to do while the motor's running. So let me get this set up and I'll be right back. Alright, so quick recap of what I did there. Still getting the carb tuned in a little bit, and the motor was off for a few minutes, so I had to wait for the choke to open all the way back up and warm up again. But I just sat there, waited for it to warm up, and once that happened, choke was fully open. You could see me grab the throttle linkage down there and rev it up, and just kind of held it there as I sprayed it onto both throttle plates. This CRC stuff is the second year I've used it. It doesn't really smoke out the exhaust, so there's nothing really to tell you it's getting in there, but obviously it's getting in there. So I just kind of rolled with that, kind of sprayed it pretty heavy. And then the one other key thing I didn't mention before is once you're done spraying it, let off the throttle, and you want to shut off the engine as quick as you can. And you want to shut off the engine as quick as you can. Because you don't want the pistons to keep going up and down in the cylinder, just kind of wiping all that stuff off and kind of burning it out of the engine. You want it to stay on the cylinder walls. So as soon as you're done spraying, lay off the throttle and kill the power as quick as you can. That is all you need to do basically with the motor running. So the next part I'm going to cover is what I'm going to call the controversial part. So there are several schools of thought here on the correct way to do this, but I'll tell you what I do. So on these Mercruiser engines, you have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places that I like to drain. So what I like to do is I like to drain the block and the manifolds and everything of all the water, and that's it. I do not put antifreeze in, nothing else. A lot of people, when I first started to get into boating, the first time I had to winterize a boat, I kind of went online and saw what the proper procedure was, and I thought I was gonna have to buy all these crazy like plumbing gadgets for getting the antifreeze in the motor and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I came across a couple of threads on iBoats and a couple other places that it seemed like the experts kind of all agreed that if there's no water in the block, there's nothing to freeze. I can't tell you how many threads I've read of people saying my block cracked, or my head cracked, or my manifold cracked this over this winter, and I don't know why. I put antifreeze in, I followed all the steps, and it's plain and simple. It comes down to you didn't get all the water out. Antifreeze doesn't freeze, water freezes. Air doesn't freeze, water freezes. So if you get all the water out and drain it, there's going to be nothing left to freeze. So I'm going to show you the proper kind of points to drain to guarantee that everything gets out. Man, I'm just running something loud right now, so hopefully it's not too annoying. So let me go around and show you, and this is actually why it's convenient, because the boat's out of the motor, so I can get down here and show you all this stuff easily. If this was in a boat, it'd be tough to see. So on these V8 Mercruisers, I'm not sure where they're at on a 3-liter, but you have a drain plug at each manifold, one on each side. This is the same for the V6s, because my last V6 was the same way. You also have a block drain under here, and you have one on the other side as well. The two other places that I like to drain are, one, which I actually already did just because it's out of the boat. This is your raw water intake hose that goes through on this model. It's kind of behind my mount here. This is your power steering. Here's my finger. This is your power steering cooler. So this cools the power steering fluid, little heat exchanger. But your raw water from the outdrive, it's coming from your impeller, goes through this hose up into the engine. And this is one of the lowest points to drain out your cooling channels in the motor. So I also disconnect this. So on the boat, it's kind of tough to get back to that end on the transom plate. So what I usually do is disconnect one of these hose clamps up here and just drain it into the bilge and out the transom drain. And the last place that I usually drain, which I have only ever gotten water out of it once, and I'm not sure why, and so I just got in the habit of doing it anyway, is this main hose here that runs from the thermostat housing down to the water pump. This real big hose right in the front. I disconnect it from the bottom of the water pump and let that drain, just in case there's anything sitting in the bottom of the water pump that for any reason didn't get out. So this is how I've winterized my boats in the past, and I've yet to have a cracked block, so
let's go ahead and do it.
These usually are reasonably tight, but I have had these out not that long ago. So in my case, these are going to be pretty easy. Now, you need to be careful because you just ran this motor up to operating temperature. So some of this water that comes out could be kind of hot. The stuff in here isn't too bad because this is the manifolds, which is basically your raw water intake, which in my case is coming straight out of the garden hose, which is pretty cold. So this stuff coming out right now is really not hot. It's basically just any heat it's gained from sitting in the manifold since I stopped the motor. The funny thing is with these manifolds, actually, the quicker you drain it, the cooler it's going to be because it hasn't had a chance to sit in there and pick up heat from the motor. So while that's draining, let's pull this one out. Now this one can be tough sometimes, and I'll show you what I use. I mean, you can really use anything, but I always found these adjustable crescent wrenches work pretty well. There's going to be one more trick here that I haven't shown you yet that might not be obvious if this is the first time you've done it. There we go. So these drains are kind of interesting. It drains out the middle once you loosen it, and right now is a perfect example of why I don't like these drains. I actually will unscrew this till it comes out the whole way. Just waiting for super hot water to drain all over my hand. There we go. So if you look down the middle of this thing, there's actually a hole in there, and it's totally plugged with mud and rust and gunk. Normally, see that? Let me see if this rinses out. Nope. Still nasty. So what you would do in a case like this, if you have these types of drains, if you don't want to take it out the whole way, which you might as well because it's easy, but you can actually take like a coat hanger or a piece of wire and jam it up through there, and that'll get any chunks out. And you actually want to do that anyway. Sorry about that. You actually want to do that anyway, because a lot of times these things will get sand and debris picked up from the raw water intake and the outdrive, and you'll end up with a lot of sand and gunk inside your cooling passages in the motor. So that's actually feels pretty good. It's a little toasty. You'll want to jam that wire up in there anyway, because a lot of times you'll see water come out, it's like dribbling, you're like, oh, there wasn't that much in there, and then you shove that coat hanger up in there and you'll break loose any debris, and then all of a sudden a bunch more water will come pouring out. So the fact that nothing came out of this manifold kind of leads me to believe that that might be the case there, but it also could be because when I disconnect my garden hose from this raw water intake, that already actually drained a lot of the block. But let me go get a piece of wire and I'll see if anything else comes out. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. I actually ended up just grabbing kind of a small flathead screwdriver. This will work pretty well. So I'm just going to shove this up in there, kind of work it around. Yeah, that seems good then. Make sure you go in at an angle where the hose is coming. Alright, so that is good. I'm just going to let that sit there and drip for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and get the fittings on the other side, which are the same as these, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so while I had the camera off there, I disconnected the stuff I didn't need anymore, so I got rid of the battery, took the fuel line off, just to clean up the working area. Didn't want to spill water on the battery and all that kind of fun stuff. I drained these other two on here like I said I would, and the raw water is already disconnected like I said, so assuming I would have done that already. The last place I do is this hose here. So on this boat, what I'm having to do is actually disconnect the top as well. Normally you wouldn't need to do that because there wouldn't be any water up there, but I needed to get some leverage on it. So I loosened this hose clamp up here and removed it. And I also loosened the hose clamp down here where it attaches to the water pump. So when these hoses are on there for a while, a lot of times you'll want to take a screwdriver and kind of like get it up underneath the hose carefully and just kind of move it around, because it almost like seals to it. You'll actually hear it like separating. So just do that at both ends, and kind of the test is whether or not you kind of got it loose enough is you can kind of twist it and then it'll just walk off. So what I'm going to do down here is, if I can do this with one hand, is attempt to get this bottom hose off. But it's actually tricky the way these fuel hoses are routed. It's kind of stupid. I don't know if they were routed this way aftermarket or if this is actually the OEM kind of routing. It's kind of dumb. In my opinion, it would make more sense to go behind this hose because it's kind of pinched between two fuel lines, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this one-handed or not. You can see the water coming out. That's why we do it. Clearly you didn't get all the water out yet. Here we go. Okay, so that was pretty much it. It was just the water sitting kind of... Jeez, that's tough. Okay, so that was basically just the water that was sitting in the bottom of that elbow. It's almost like a plumbing trap. So we got all that out. That is basically it though. Let's see, did I miss anything? Got all the water spots drained. Just make sure you put everything back before you're done. I wouldn't recommend leaving the drains out. Just let them drain for maybe 10-15 minutes. Again, you can't see anything over here. Again, take that screwdriver or wire or whatever and plug all, or go in, prod around in those holes, make sure you got everything cleaned out. And after it sits dripping for 10 or 15 minutes and basically is done, go ahead and put those plugs back in. Less holes means less spots for bugs and critters and mice to make a home out of, because trust me, that will happen. And with those brass plugs, just make sure you give them a good snug twist with that wrench. There's no O-ring on those. If this is the type yours has, there's different kinds. I think some boats have the brass plugs on both the block and manifold. Some have the plastic ones in both spots. Whatever's there. If it's plastic with O-rings, hand tight's good. If it's brass, snug it up with a wrench because it's brass on brass making that seal. So yeah, replace the plugs once all the water's drained. We put in the fogging oil. That is, to be totally honest with you, pretty much it for winterizing. Some people prefer to do some of this stuff in the fall versus the winter, but I'm not a huge fan of replacing stuff just for it to sit all winter. I kind of like to let it sit and then do some of the stuff in the spring, some of that stuff being the impeller. Alpha 1 Gen 2s, I think kind of the rule of thumb is to replace the impeller every about 3, maybe 4 seasons. The oil I change every year, but I also do that in the spring. Obviously you want to check the oil, make sure it's the level's good and there's no water or anything in it. As long as the oil level's good, looks nice and oily, no water, should be good to sit for the winter. Again, just kind of go through and top off your fluids, check your power steering fluid, make sure that's okay. Go over your electrical connections, maybe with some dielectric grease, clean them up if you need to, but I really like to save the fluid changes and stuff like that for the spring, so I know I got nice fresh oil in there in the spring. But that is pretty much it, guys. Hopefully that was pretty straightforward. I kind of just wanted to explain why I don't use antifreeze. Again, just air doesn't freeze, and it's like I said, I can't tell you how many people I've heard crack their blocks because they used antifreeze and clearly didn't displace all the water. As long as you drain all these spots I just showed you, prod around them with some wire, a screwdriver, and get all that water out, you're never gonna have a cracked block, at least from improper winterizing. So hopefully you guys like this. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, all that good stuff. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.